Hey, friends. Thanks so much for tuning into this online gathering of Redeeming Hope. I'm so glad that you guys are tuned in with us as we continue on in our sermon series, The Cheerful Giver. Before we jump into that, just a reminder, we meet weekly at the Clarksville area YMCA. That's 260 Hillcrest Drive. We meet at 9:45 for coffee and donuts, and we have our church gathering at 10 o'clock. And we'd love to invite you to come. So you've been checking us out. If you've moved into the Clarksville area and you've been watching us online, we'd love to invite you to come and join us, especially this upcoming Sunday, Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday. We're doing actually a little reading down at the Cumberland Riverwalk, where we're reading about the resurrection of Jesus and singing a couple of songs acoustically. And then we're going to go up to the YMCA and have our normal gathering starting at 9:45. So we'd love to invite you guys to join us if you can make it. Now, I have a confession to make as we begin our gathering today. I'm a nerd. Now, for those of you who know me, who've met me, this is not a surprise to you at all. Yes, I am a nerd. And I nerd out about certain things, and one of those things is Lord of the Rings. So I make a frequent pattern of trying to read the Lord of the Rings. It's been, over the course of the past 10 years, maybe I've read them 4 or 5 times all the way through. But just finished reading The Return of the King, and I'm sobbing and crying as I read. And then, of course, Rachel and I had to watch the movies, which we love. And we have on every platform, VHS, DVD, Apple. All right, so we just threw it up on the Apple TV. We were watching it, and again, that like sobbing and crying at the end. But as we were watching The Return of the King, we kind of have to break it up because it's so long. By the way, there's only one official version of the Lord of the Rings movies, and that's the extended edition. So if you're not watching the extended edition, that is not the official Josh sanctioned version. I would like to encourage you to get the extended edition. There's no other version in my mind. So anyway, when you're watching the extended edition of The Return of the King, there's like a 10-minute segment at the beginning about the creature Golem. Right, that's one of the most famous characters in the whole movie series. And Golem was a river folk. It was like a hobbit. And the story about him and his brother finding the Ring of Power after thousands of years of it being lost. And so what actually happened was Smeagol, who is the name of Golem before Golem became Golem, Smeagol didn't find the ring. His brother did. And it was Smeagol's birthday, and they were fishing. And his brother found this ring. Smeagol ends up killing his brother, and he takes the ring, and he spends 500 years in a cave. Now, I don't think they tell you that in the movie, but when you read the books, he spends literally 500 years in a cave with the ring. And, when he looks at the ring, he thinks he possesses it. This is what's so interesting about Golem, is that he thinks he's possessing the ring. He calls it my own, my precious. He wears it. He holds it tight. He essentially spends 500 years cuddling the ring. But here's the deal. Everybody that watches the movies knows that the ring is actually possessing him. Everybody knows this, right? Because underneath the power of this dark ring, the darkness, the wickedness of this ring of power, it imprints its wickedness onto Smeagol and turns him into this terrible, disgusting, grotesque thing that coughs and hacks that we call Gollum. So Gollum thought that he had the ring, but in fact the ring had him. And when it had used him up, it just discarded him and then went on to the next person, trying to find its way back to Sauron. So this is what brings us to our second part of the 2-part series, The Cheerful Giver. And this is what kind of brings us to our conversation today, is that many of the things that you and I think we own, they own us. And there's this prevailing narrative in the world, and I don't think it's too surprising or revolutionary. This is not new information. The prevailing narrative in the world that says what you do and what you own determines who you are, and that ultimately you're in control, right? This is not a surprise to any of us. What you do and what you own determine who you are and that you're in control. And this philosophy says kind of at the end of the day that our time and things are ours, that we're the master of our fate, we're the captains of our souls. And what we see in the culture around us is the byproduct of this mentality is that we become filled with pride and fear when we think that we are in ultimate control of our lives and destinies and time and things. And what this does is that pride and fear leads us into a deep, abiding anxiety about our lives. And so I think that's why many of us in this world have anxiety, suffer from anxiety, because it's actually rooted in pride and fear when we think that our time and things are ours. Pride essentially says it's mine. Fear says it won't be mine much longer. And anxiety says it's all on my shoulders, right? Pride says it's mine. Fear says it won't be mine much longer. I have to grasp at it. And anxiety says it's kind of all on me. It's all on my shoulders. And what we see too is then we find that pride and fear often determine how we interact with our time and things. They interact with our possessions. This means that all of a sudden we aren't in control then, but rather our time and things begin to control us. How often have we said, man, I just wish I had the time to do that. Man, I just feel like the day got away from me. Man, I wish I could help you. I don't have anything on me at the moment, right? What we see is that anxiety is produced by pride and fear that then allows us to be controlled by our time and things instead of us submitting that we don't control anything, actually. And this is where we come to the truth, the beauty of the gospel, that teaches us that this is not the way that you and I were created. This is not how life was meant to be lived. That the Bible tells us that our time and things are actually God's, that everything. And so when we see that God possesses all of our time and things, we don't have to, in pride, work harder than we need to, or in fear, be anxious about losing what we have. When we acknowledge that everything we have is underneath God's control, and it's actually His, we become free to enjoy our time and things without being controlled by them because we're just stewards of what is already God's. And so it's actually ultimately in God's control. And so here at Redeeming Hope, we actually want you to thrive. Like, that's what we're here for. We want you to thrive spiritually, emotionally, physically, psychologically. We want you to thrive throughout the whole gamut of human experience. And we want you to be free. We want you to be free to enjoy Jesus and actually enjoy good things that He's given us and then freely give back to God and to others out of that enjoyment. And that's what Pastor Derek talked about last week with the idea of a cheerful giver. This is that cheer that he talked about. So this leads us to our sermon text for today, which is in Luke chapter 12. And Jesus said to His disciples, "Therefore I tell you, don't be anxious about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens, they neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouses nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than birds? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? If then you are not able to do as small a thing as that, then why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today, and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will He clothe you? Oh, you of little faith! And do not seek what you are to eat or what you are to drink, nor be worried. For all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek His kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." This is God's word. So we're here and we're going to be talking about three things today when we look at the idea that everything is His. We're going to talk about how God created us for freedom, that pride and fear enslave us to things, and the greatest thing is free. So God created us for freedom, pride and fear enslave us to things, and then the greatest thing is free. So let's first off look about how God created us for freedom. You see, to understand Luke 12 and why Jesus is even having to tell the disciples not to be anxious, we have to kind of rewind back. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I grew up in a very Christianized environment. I went to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and I kind of grew up with this, what I like to call the missionary in the hut mentality, right? Like those who are really serious about their faith, who are really intense about it, would go live in a hut in Papua New Guinea or go live in a hut in Africa and be missionaries. And like you'd never hear from them again. And then occasionally, every couple of years, they'd come back home on furlough and they'd be weird and their kids would be strange and socially awkward. And I remember they had these slideshows, like this was before, digital stuff. So they would literally have these little microfilms that they'd put on this little projector that would rotate, and they'd go, and it would like rotate these little like images that would have a light expanding on it, and they would project on the screen, right? So that's like they'd say all these pictures of them in huts and building wells and all these other kind of things. And so that, to me, that was like the epitome of like, if you're really faithful to Jesus, if you really care about God and spiritual things, you'd move to Africa and be a missionary. And so I think that's culturally a little bit, especially in the Southern context, where some people have kind of got this idea of like, I don't ever want to be a professional Christian, like work for God in any sort of ministry, because I don't have to move to Africa, right? And fight the mosquitoes. But here's the deal. It never really occurred to me that people can be completely sold out for Jesus and live like normal lives and work normal jobs and like have normal, like seemingly normal lives. And when I started to read the Bible for myself, and I started to explore faith and the gospel, I started to see that missionary and hunt mentality is wrong. Like, some people have an over desire to have nice things. Some people have guilt for having nice things. But actually, God created us for freedom and to enjoy. So this is really important for us to understand. In the Christian faith, we believe two things. We believe that God owns all things and that he loves us. So there's like 20,000 different verses, probably not 20,000. There's probably dozens of different verses for each of those things, but I just picked one from the Old and one from the New Testament. So Deuteronomy 10:14 says, "Behold, to the Lord your God belong heaven and the heavens of heavens, the earth, and all that is in it." Pretty clear. Heavens and the earth, like everything we can see, everything from the tiniest atom in the dust to the largest solar system, the largest galaxy, everything is God's. He owns all of it, right? And he created all of it. And then we see, again, numerous places in the Bible talk about God's love, but 1 John 4 says it really succinctly. It says, "So we've come to know and believe the love that God has for us, that God is love. And whoever abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him." So we see that money and possessions, let me be really clear on this, money and possessions are not inherently bad. They actually can be used for good things. In Luke 1, it actually says that God has filled the hungry with good things. And we see that there are actually wealthy people all throughout the Bible that like use their wealth for God, but they don't like take a vow of poverty and give every single thing away and live like in a cardboard box in the street. We see Joseph of Arimathea. He's featured in all four Gospels. We see women that actually supported Jesus's ministry out of their means. This is in Luke 8, where they actually were actually supporting Jesus as a missionary and paying for him to go around and preach the gospel. And we see that Philemon had a large house. He was wealthy, and the church actually met at his house. The church in Colossae actually met at Philemon's house. It's pretty amazing. So he had a pretty big place. And when you see in even Deuteronomy 8, it was talking about the nation of Israel. It was God giving the nation of Israel promises that they would actually receive wealth. And he says, "You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth." So what we see here in the scriptures is that actually God created us to enjoy his love through enjoying his creation. We were created to enjoy his love, to be a recipient of his glory, his infinite goodness, his infinite love, his infinite holiness, his infinite grace, his infinite justice, his infinite mercy. All these things. We're made to receive all of who God is, that's including his love, and then reflect it back to God and to each other. So he created us to enjoy him through his created things. See, it's not about the thing, but it's about the thing underneath the thing, right? That's the thing. It's not the possessions. It's actually God that gives us those possessions that we were designed to enjoy. And we kind of look at how we interact with our kids, right? Or our family members or people that we love. Like, we give gifts and we give experiences to our children and to our loved ones. Why? Because we love them. We want to lavish love on them, and that those physical expressions of our love are tokens of something deeper. We would never want to give our child a trip to Disney World and have them fall in love with Mickey Mouse, right? That wouldn't make any sense, right? Like, they just love Mickey Mouse. They want to go live with Mickey Mouse. They want to spend all of their days with Mickey Mouse. No, we give them this experience so that they can see through these these minor physical tokens the deeper truth of how we love them and want to see them thrive and enjoy life, right? So, what we see here is that God actually intended us and created us for freedom. He created us to enjoy His creation without being possessed by it. But what happens is that there's a misordered love that generates pride. So, what we see is that pride and fear actually enslaves us to the things of this world. We see this clearly in Romans 1. It says, it's talking about how sin has pervaded the world. And it says, because we exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than Creator. So we traded the love and the worship of God, like receiving all of who He is, and then reflecting that back to God and back to others. We traded that for the worship of created things who can't give us that infinite source of joy, love, and peace. And this is why Jesus had to say these words in Luke 12. Let me just remind you of the first part of what He said. He said to His disciples, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? And when we think about anxiety, and it's, again, kind of going back to Lord of the Rings because it's kind of fresh in my mind, like, have we ever seen a more anxious person than Gollum? Right? Remember, actually, at the end of the movies, Gollum actually gets the ring. Like, Frodo gets to the ring of the fires of Mount Doom, and he was about ready to throw the ring in, and then he fails. He actually doesn't do that. He ends up putting on the ring, claiming it as his own, and was going to walk away. He wasn't going to destroy the ring. But then something interesting happens. Gollum creeps up. He jumps on him. He then bites off his finger and takes the ring, right? And this is what he looks like. And he's standing at the edge of the fires of Mount Doom, and he's holding it up, and him and Frodo have been wrestling and fighting for it. But what happens is that he actually loses his balance. He falls down and he dies in the lava of Mount Doom. So the ring is destroyed, but it also destroys Gollum in the process, and it actually almost destroyed Frodo. And the question that we have again is, who ultimately possesses the Ring of Power? Earlier on in the movie, Gandalf, the wise wizard that's guiding them along this process, he tells us earlier in the story that no one in history except Sauron can truly possess, can truly control the ring. But what the ring does is it possesses and overtakes even the strongest. Gandalf said, I would use it for good, but through it, it would wield a power more terrible than any could ever imagine. You see, Gollum, again, thought he owned the ring for 500 years, but it owned him. It changed him. And what does he say all the time? He says, it's my own, my precious. And what do we see here? What do we see the connection, the bridge here between the story of Gollum and this idea of anxiety is this idea of pride and fear. Pride always says, when we look at our things, pride says it's mine. But then fear says it won't be mine much longer. I have to pursue it. I have to fight for it. I'm going to lose it, or maybe I have lost it. And anxiety then says, it's all on my shoulders. It's all on my shoulders to have to deal with. And what this does, both fear and pride and collectively anxiety, what it does is it turns us inward instead of upward. And the Bible warns us of this, and it warns us specifically about the power of possessions, money, and wealth to turn us inward in either pride or fear instead of upward and trusting in God. In Proverbs 18, this is the New Living Translation, it says, the rich think of their wealth as a strong defense. They imagine it to be a high wall of safety. I chose the NLT because I just thought that was such an interesting translation of it. Just a very poignant way to consider it, that the rich think of their wealth as a strong defense. They imagine it to be a high wall of safety. And you see, when we look at pride as it relates to our time and things, pride says, I worked hard. I deserve this. This is my safety. This is how I am okay. That's like Gollum saying, it's mine, my own, my precious. But fear says, I will lose this strong defense. I will lose my safety. I need to fight and scrap like an orphan to keep it and regain it. And this is Gollum when he's so angry with Frodo and Sam. He says, filthy hobbitses, they stole it from us. Either way, with pride or fear, both look at the problem and they say, I can solve these problems myself. I can look inward for the solution, right? Pride says, it's mine. Look at me. Look at all the things I've done, right? Fear says, I'm going to lose this. I have to fight for it. But both are turning inward, saying, it's all centered on me. And that's what generates anxiety. And here's the deal. You don't have to be rich to be consumed by possessions and money. I mean, the pursuit of them, whether this over attention and focus, can be crushing. So like pride can keep you from giving what you have, even if you have just a little bit, even just a little bit. You can say, this little bit that I have is mine. It's my own, right? Pride can keep you from giving that away. And then fear can keep you from giving what you have, even if you have a lot, even if you are wealthy and successful. Fear can keep you from giving even just a little bit away because you're afraid you might lose it. You see how pride and fear work, whether you have a lot or a little. It's not about the amount of money that you have. And there's no sort of moral equation that says if you have more or less, you're better or worse. What it says is that pride and fear both control how we interact with our time and things, regardless of how much we actually have. You see, what happens is that pride and fear lead us to self-reliance. Self-reliance says, I can solve my own problems. And self-reliance leads us to unbelief, really saying, well, God is not enough. God can't solve my problems. I have to solve my problems. And that's what leads to anxiety. It says, I have to fight for what I need. And many of us have anxiety. We have anxiety about the world around us. Am I safe? We're anxious about the world inside of us. Am I okay? Am I worthy? Anxious about our time. Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I wasting my life? We can be anxious about our things. Will I be provided for? Do I have enough? You see, what happens is it's a reorientation of our love that then generates this fear and pride that enslaves us to things and anxiety. And here's the deal. We don't actually love the zeros in our bank account, right? We don't love the little zeros that appear on the screen. We don't love the dollar bills that we have, but we love what they give us, right? We love the safety and the security and the identity that money gives us. We love the hope and the freedom that financial success can give us. We love the enjoyment and the distraction of the things that we have. But here's the deal. If your hope is based on anything, that you can lose, you'll forever be unstable and anxious. If your hope is based on anything you can lose, you'll forever be unstable and anxious. And that leads us to our final point, is that the greatest thing is free. Look with me at Luke 12, 24, and then verses 27. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than birds? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today, and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? See, what Jesus is doing with his disciples, what he's doing with us, is we're invited not to look inward with anxiety, but rather outward and upward. He says, look at. He's telling you to look outward, to see the demonstrations of God's provision all around us. And then he says, look upward, say, if God loves them, how much more important are you than ravens and lilies and grass? You see, what's interesting about ravens, the ravens, lilies, and grass are very interesting because ravens are disgusting creatures, right? They're reproachable. They were considered unclean in Jewish culture. They were unclean to eat or even touch. And what they do is they don't cultivate or generate anything. They don't have a place to store their food. They don't store their food for wintertime. They don't plan out where to find worms to eat. They just kind of fly about and look for food when they can get it. And so what the ravens are telling us is that God has compassion for disgusting, gross, and unclean things. Like he cares for them. Like he cares for these gross ravens that any Jewish person in the first century would have considered just to be unclean and untouchable. But then you turn the gamut, right? And then you see lilies. These are beautiful, wonderful flowers. There's actually people that are way more nerdy than I am, like write commentaries on what kind of flowers he was referring to and what kind of crocuses there are and like what types of lilies there were, whether they're purple or red. Who cares? They're lilies. They're beautiful things, right? And they would be majestic. Lilies were a sign of majesty. And they don't weave themselves. They don't sustain themselves, yet God lavishes them with beauty. And you see, this shows the compassion of God for beautiful flowery things that are temporary, right? Like God makes these beautiful flowers beautiful in bloom, knowing that they're not going to last. And then we look at the grass. That's very common, temporary. It was used for fuel, right? You take grass, you throw in the fire to get started. So this shows the compassion of God for fleeting, temporary, common things. This is what it's telling us. When we look outside of ourselves, we find that the greatest thing we could ever possess can never be earned, it can never be lost, it can never be taken away from us. And this is the Father's heart of compassion for his children. He says, little flock, it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Like he delights in you. He delights in giving you his best. It says clearly you're more important than unclean ravens, beautiful flowers, and common grass used for fuel. And here's the deal. If God lovingly, carefully takes care of these things, how much more will he take care of you? He calls us his little flock. It's his pleasure to give us the kingdom. And then when we actually pull back at the whole of Scripture, we see it's the entire Trinity working for you to show you the compassion of God offered for us. You see, what is God's heart for you and me? We see in the Father's heart, it's love and compassion for us, right? It says the Father looked down. Ephesians 1 is all about the Father's plan to send Jesus to save us. It's all about the Father lavishing us with his grace, lavishing us with his compassion. When you actually read the proper nouns into the pronouns of Ephesians 1, when it talks about he and him, most of Ephesians 1 is actually talking about the Father's love, the Father's compassion, the Father's grace, the Father's lavishing us with all these things. And he's lavishing us his grace and his love through Christ, through sending Christ. So it's our Father's love and compassion for his little flock, his little sheep. And then we see it's Jesus' work to make you lovable. It's actually his substitution and his sacrifice for us that comes in, that breaks into the world, that frees us, that saves us. It's like love with teeth, right? It's like actually him coming into the world, breaking in. It's getting in the dirt with us. It's becoming like us in every way, tempted yet without sin, perfect and holy, dying as our substitute and rising again for our justification so we can be declared innocent before God, right? So it's Jesus' work to make us lovable. So it's the Father's love and compassion and plan to save us. It's Jesus' work and response in cooperation with his Father's plan. And then the Holy Spirit is in the power to free you from anxiety. God's indwelling presence within the life of those who follow him is the Holy Spirit. And it's God inside of us that then allows us to be free to enjoy the goodness and beauty and the truth of all that he's given us, right? It allows us to be free from anxiety. And my friends, this is why Jesus focused so much on anxiety when teaching specifically about money, because he wants us to be free to receive the greatest gift of God's heart of compassion for us. Look at what he says in Luke 12. He says, "And which of you by being anxious can add a single hour to a span of life? If then you are not able to do as small a thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? And do not seek what you are to eat or what you are to drink, nor be worried, for all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows." My friends, the greatest gift is free. Here's the deal. When you and I were far from God, unclean like the raven, fleeting as the grass, even our beauty was just like a lily fading with the first frost of autumn. Jesus provided everything that we could ever possibly need. He took our sin as our substitute. He endured the cross because we were his joy, and he took our anxiety so that we could live free, unencumbered by our time and things. And he was completely abandoned and alone and destitute and poor on the cross so that you and I could be infinitely provided for, so that you and I could be rich. It says he was made poor so that you and I could be rich in him. He actually became our unloveliness so that he could love us into becoming lovely again. He took on death so that we could live eternally. And now, when we approach life like this, there's nothing to fear. Nothing is ours. Everything is his, and we don't have to fight to get anything. We don't have to be afraid anymore to lose what we have because we already have the best gift, our Father's love, embodied in the person and the work of Jesus, delivered through the indwelling work of the Holy Spirit. It is all ours. So how does this translate into actually being less anxious and to our series, The Cheerful Giver? Well, I'm very glad that you asked that. Thank you. At the end of Luke, it says these things. Luke 12, it says, "Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with no money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." He invites us to be free from things. So there's 4 ways to do that I'm going to suggest for us today. One is seek the kingdom. This is God's rule and reign in the world, right? His kingdom is breaking in. This is the fuller expression of God's power, and God's glory is breaking into the world, and we can seek that. We can search for that. We can see that kingdom come more fully in our own lives as we see that our stuff is not ours, but it's God's. It's actually his authority. It's his kingdom. It's his stuff to use. And when you see everything in your life is his, you have just an immense freedom, like to let people borrow your car, to let people come live in your house, to give away your money, to give away your time, to give away the best of who you are. That's seeking the kingdom because it's God's rule and reign, not ours, right? So first is seek the kingdom. Second, practice generosity. My friends, giving is the cure for pride and fear. Like when you give, like open-handed give, not expecting anything in return, just open-handedly giving, being generous with your time, being generous with your things, especially with your money, which is where a lot of our pride and fear are rooted in. It actually allows you to be free. And so it actually cures you of the pride and fear when you give consistently. It's a discipline that leads to delight. Then practice thankfulness. Thankfulness is the cure for non-clinical anxiety. I always have to add that. Like there is clinical anxiety that we have good medicine and good doctors in this world for. But for those of us who don't suffer from that, but just the anxiousness of life and just the anxiousness that comes from these spiritual struggles, thankfulness is the cure for that. Like practicing consistently being thankful to God for what he's given us, and we steward what he's given us as stewards, not owners. Practicing thankfulness is just an absolute cure when you're feeling anxious. You just run through the gamut of God. Thank you for my life. Thank you for this very breath that I'm breathing right now. Thank you that I can have vocal cords to speak. Thank you that I have friends. Thank you I have a church community. Practicing thankfulness. And then finally, fight anxiety. My friends, rebel against the power of this world with truth and community. Like we need to hear the gospel consistently in a local community of believers. And then we need to be in with other believers that are telling us a different narrative than what the world is saying to us, right? What's so interesting at the end of Lord of the Rings as I kind of think about the story as I've been reading it and then watching it is the difference between Gollum and Frodo. One of the questions is how did Frodo get so far without being taken over by the ring? Like we had this weird kind of ending at Mount Doom where he kind of pulls the ring back, but for the most part, he did not get fully taken over by the ring. How did he do this? And why did Gollum so quickly succumb to the power of the ring? See, what Gollum did was he listened to the narrative. Alone in the cave, he was being poisoned by himself in this cave. Like he had nobody around him. He killed his brother, he ran away, and he hid in a cave for 500 years. He was completely getting poisoned in isolation and alone. But we see Frodo, he had good friends. He had good, wholesome, good friends who reminded him of his mission. They reminded him of the truth of the ring and how deceptive it was. And he especially had Sam, who literally carried him up the mountain to Mount Doom. He had someone that stayed by his side, who was with him. This is why we have to be in community. We have to be in a community that reminds us of the truth, that rebels against the narrative, that rebels against the darkness, that rebels against this pride and fear. And so how do we respond? We seek the kingdom. Everything is his. And we live like everything is his, and that God's kingdom is breaking in the world, which goes against how the world views our time and things. So we seek the kingdom, practice generosity, practice thankfulness. We fight the anxiety with truth and community. My friends, when the Father's love is our treasure, when it's our greatest gift, our heart, it finds security, it finds rest, and it finds delight again. And then we can look at the things around us, and then we can experience the love of God through the gifts that he's given us. And so that's what I want for you. I want you to be free. I want you to be whole. I want you to thrive and see God's love in everything around you. Thank you so much for watching this gathering today. We hope you'll join us in person at the Clarksville Area YMCA next week. Have a good week.